Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Marley, the co-host of the Ping Jockey podcast, and I'm sitting here this morning with the Ping Jockey himself, Mr. Kenneth H Fidler. Before I started working with Mr. Fidler, I knew little about what it meant to serve in the Navy. There was the time early on when I foolishly called a ship a boat, a mistake I would never make again. And the reason for the distinction between the two is because ships carry boats, people, and goods. A boat is much smaller in size. I also learned what it meant to commission a ship, which is something we will be discussing in today's episode. I've benefited from the knowledge that Mr. Fidler has graciously shared, and think that those of you who are interested in learning more about what it was like to be in the Navy, serving one's country in World War II, will learn much as well. Last week, we left our listeners with the notice that Mr. Fidler had received orders to report to Norfolk, Virginia. What ship were you assigned to, Mr. Fidler?
The USS Loy, DE-160.
What was it like to arrive at the USS Loy?
Well, on August 21st, I was one of 10 sonarmen that arrived there. And because the ship was still under construction, no one was sleeping on there yet. So we were assigned to a barracks in St. Helena, Norfolk Naval Base. And we lived there, and then every day we were given working parties on the ship.
So what were the working parties like? Did you hold different types of jobs to prepare the ship?
We were staying on every day on different working parties. Sometimes we were loading stores, or sometimes we were standing fire watch when they were welding. We'd be there with with the equipment to take care of it if a fire broke out. And there was a lot of welding at the time. And then there was also a lot of painting.
Now, you have a funny story that happened with the painting, don't you?
Yeah, I think I do. While we were still living in the barracks, the whole crew was given nice warm working jackets with the ship's name and our own name stenciled on it. I wore my jacket to fire watch and took it off because it was warm below deck. I hooked it on a bulkhead, and later in the day I was sent to the next compartment. I left my jacket hanging on the bulkhead and realized at the end of the day that I couldn't find it. Then I realized they had spray painted the whole compartment and didn't bother to even move my jacket. There it was, all covered with paint. Fortunately, I was able to get another jacket without too much trouble.
Without too much trouble. What were the physical aspects of the ship?
The physical aspects of our ship were designed in answer to frequent sinkings of merchantmen in the Atlantic. It was an inexpensive, quickly constructed, high-speed escort vessel capable of offensive operations against those forces of the enemy, which intruded upon our one supply lanes and international commerce.
Wow. What does it mean to commission a ship?
That is when they break the bottle on the bow and give the ship a name in honor of a certain person.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And can you tell me about what it was like to christen the USS Loy?
I will try.
Okay.
Our ship was christened on September 12, 1943, and commissioned the USS Loy, DE-160, to commemorate the services of Jackson Keith Loy, gunner's mate, 3rd class, USN Loy, was born in Effingham, Illinois on April 29, 1922, and was killed in action November 12, 1942. He first enlisted in Chicago on September 4, 1940, serving until his death. He received the Navy Cross posthumously with the following citation: for extraordinary heroism as a gunner aboard the USS San Francisco during action against enemy Japanese forces in the Solomon Islands area on November 12th and 13th, 1942, courageously refusing to abandon his gun in the face of an onrushing Japanese torpedo plane. Loy, with cool determination and utter disregard for his own personal safety, kept blazing away until the hostile craft plunged out of the sky in a flaming dive and crashed on his station. His grim perseverance and relentless devotion to duty in the face of certain death were in keeping with the highest traditions of the United States Naval Service. He gallantly gave up his life in the defense of his country.
Wow. Wow, what a citation.
Following the usual difficulties associated with breaking a bottle of champagne on the ship's bow, the prospective commanding officer, his officers, the commandant, and assembled guests went aboard and were included at the commissioning ceremony. The commandant ordered the ship placed in commission and delivered her to James B. Buick of Annapolis, Lieutenant Commander USN, who read the orders, assumed command, and set the first watch. I'll never forget the speech delivered by our new captain, Lieutenant Commander. While we stood at attention on the fantail, near the end of the speech, he said, "I hope we will see the day that this ship goes down in history." I didn't like the way he said down. I wasn't that great of a swimmer.
What a choice of words he used. I wonder if you were the only person to pick up on that. So I'm assuming that the speech was the final part of the commissioning. And by this point, were you living on the ship?
No, we were just beginning to move on. And we were assigned our bunks. And it turns out I was in the O Division. The O Division was sonarman, radarman, all those that are stand watch on the bridge. And the bridge was on the top side up near the bow where the captain and a lot of the officers that run the ship were always up there. But O Division were assigned their bunks down beneath the galley.
What's a galley?
It's sort of like the kitchen where they prepared all the food.
Ah.
And then all that food had to be taken down to the mess hall, which was down where the bunks were.
Mm-hmm.
And there was one big steep ladder that they had to carry this food down. And walking up down that ladder, carrying anything in bad weather was pretty hard because the ship was going up and down and rolling both ways. And some mornings my shoes was always at the foot of the ladder.
You had strategically placed them.
Yeah. And sometimes they'd be filled with grapefruit.
That was pretty ingenious of you. Well, it seems like you found one way to get some extra food, but what was it typically like to eat aboard the ship?
Well, they had tables down there that might have been about 6 feet long, and they were welded to the deck because the ship's always rolling. But the benches weren't welded. They had legs that folded open, and you'd put it there when we were going to use it. And so when all these guys come down carrying a tray of food, and while they're sitting there on this bench and the ship's rolling, you had to keep lifting your tray up. When it rolls one way, the food will roll out in your lap if you don't lift the tray up. And so both hands are pretty busy. And when you got 6 guys on this long bench, the 2 on the end sometimes move around. And
Is there like a seesaw effect?
Yeah. And one time, one of the guys, his foot caught in the thing that released the legs. And the seat went down, and everybody went every direction.
Oh my! And the trays of food probably did too.
That food was all over the place.
Oh my gosh! I don't think I could do that. Well, after a ship is commissioned, they typically set sail on their maiden voyage, also known as a shakedown cruise. Mr. Fidler, what does a shakedown cruise mean?
Well, when you got a new ship, you got to make sure everything works. And you want to make sure it's not going to sink. And so we went on a shakedown cruise to Bermuda.
Oh, a mini vacation.
And
not quite.
We weren't quite so lucky because when we left for Bermuda, there was a big hurricane off the coast of North Carolina. And most of the fellows on the ship had never even seen the ocean before. And so about 95% of them were very seasick. And fortunately, we had a small percentage of older fellows that were on other ships that were sunk, and they were transferred to a new ship. And on our trip to Bermuda, most of the time, they were taking care of the ship. We still had to stand watch with a bucket.
Oh my goodness.
But we weren't too happy.
I mean, I've only ever been out on a motorboat for an afternoon. And even by the end of that, you're tired from being in the sun. The motion of the water gets to you.
They had, our kitchen had a big vat where they'd make soup in. And they tried to make soup. But we rolled 50 and 60 degrees each way, and the soup would just run right out. And they just gave up with that. And then I think they just made some sandwiches, which a few people might have eaten.
Yeah, because nobody had much of an appetite, I'm sure. Wow. And do you remember feeling sick?
Oh, yeah. That was the first time I was seasick. And
not the last?
And I was pretty lucky. After a few days out, most of us got used to it.
Got your sea legs.
And after that, you were all right. Unless you really got in a real bad storm.
Oof.
Which we did sometimes.
Did you anchor in Bermuda?
Yeah, once we got there, we anchored there. And everybody was to go ashore for a visit, not too long. And if I remember correctly, we did go out and do a few checking things out.
Drills.
While we were circling around there, checking things out that we had to check. But we didn't. I think we stayed about a week, and then we went back to Norfolk to report to see what we're going to start doing.
So, what happened after the Shakedown cruise and you got back to Norfolk?
I think, if I remember correctly, after we got to Norfolk, I think we were assigned to go to New York.
Yeah.
And assigned to a division.
Mm-hmm.
And there were about 5 or 6 of us, same kind of ship, called a division. And then we were assigned to a big convoy. We were sent to Aruba and picked up a 100-ship convoy that we were going to escort to North Africa. And then we were going to really see whether this ship was going to be all right or not.
Wow. Can you tell the listeners what it's like to be in a convoy, to lead the convoy? Or what is a convoy for some of us that don't know?
Well, a convoy was 100 ships. The big ships that were freighters and tankers, and they were all loaded up with stuff to take over for the service over in North Africa. And so when we started out, it was 10 lines of ships, 10 ships in a row, 100 ships total. And we went as fast as the slowest ship, which is about 8 knots.
And 8 knots is, I think, roughly 10 miles per hour, something like that?
I think it's 1.6 or something like that, yeah.
Okay.
And so that's, on some days, depending which way the wind was blowing, we were almost like standing still.
Wow.
Yeah. And then other times, we ran into some real big storms where we had 60-foot waves.
Whew.
Besides going left and right, rolling back and forth, you'd go up 60 feet and you'd look way down there at the other ships ahead of us. And then all of a sudden you're going down and you look up there.
And there's another ship at the crest of the wave.
Yeah.
Wow.
That's quite a feeling. And then the worst part was most of the ships didn't have radar. And the destroyer escorts had radar. And so we could always see on the radar that the ships were all lined up straight. And during the day, they didn't have any trouble keeping in line like that.
Mm-hmm.
But at night, when it got dark, and nobody was supposed to have any lights on, even us.
Because you don't want to be seen on the water.
That's right. And so, watching the radar, sometimes we'd see some of the ships were getting too close to each other, or they were getting out of line. And our job was to go up those lines, which wasn't too safe in the dark, and get up to them, and then they'd have a horn that they get their attention and tell them they gotta straighten up, move over, you're out of line, and tell them which way to go.
Wow.
And sometimes when I was sleeping there at that time, they were hoping they don't hit any of those ships while they're going in and out of there.
Because that could cause some serious damage.
Especially in rough weather.
Yeah. How long did the trip last to North Africa?
If I remember correctly, I think it might have been about 21 days. And then we went through the Straits of Gibraltar. As we approached North Africa, we tried to plan to go pass through the Straits of Gibraltar at night. And that way we were seen from lookouts on shore. But when we got there, there had been a big convoy ahead of us, and they were attacked by torpedo planes, and several ships were sunk. And I happened to be on the mid-watch as we went through the Straits of Gibraltar. And all I was seeing was parts of ships and dead bodies floating by all night long. Wow. And I realized, I guess I'm in the war.
Wow. That's so eerie, especially at night, to see that in the water.
Yeah.
Wow. I can't begin to fathom what it was like to be a young man like yourself, only 18 years of age, being a witness to that. I want to personally thank you for sharing these often untold stories to remind us that freedom is never free.
After the 21 days, we finally reached Bizerte, French Tunisia, North Africa. We saw a lot of sunken ships in the harbor, but after a while, our ship was allowed to make our way in and tie up at dock. It was nice to finally get ashore. We were told that they had just secured the area and saw a lot of prisoners of war being marched away. I believe they were mostly Italian. And American soldiers surprised us to see us and said we were the first warship of our size to arrive, and we weren't even that big. We were allowed to go ashore in our dungarees, and one evening found out the army was going to show a movie in one of the Quonset huts. Some of us managed to get there at the right time. As we waited for the movie to start, in walked General Bradley and some of his staff. That was exciting.
Can you tell our listeners who General Bradley was?
He was, I think, he was head of the whole army over there.
Wow.
He was a big guy.
Man, that's a big wig to walk into a movie hut.
Yeah, I'll say.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Well, then shortly after, you guys set sail and were returning to Aruba. Can you tell me a little bit more about what happened on the return trip?
Yeah, when we were midway across the Atlantic on Christmas Day, one of the ships in the convoy broke down with a boiler trouble, and we were ordered to remain with her. So not only were we midway across the Atlantic, we patrolled a circle 2,000 yards in radius around the crippled merchant ship as well. It wasn't bad enough. We also received word there were 3 sightings of German submarines in our area. Fortunately, we never saw one of them. Repairs were soon made out as the ship was proceeding, and when we got back to Aruba in time to find out the rest of our division had already left for New York, and we were to stay until they returned for the next trip. You can imagine how that went over with everyone.
Oh, I'm sure you guys were PO'd, to say the least. Nothing would have been better than to go home for Christmas.
Oh, yeah.
And you guys were left behind.
And this was our first trip.
Wow. So how many trips did you make across the Atlantic to North Africa?
We made 6 trips to North Africa, 5 of them with big convoys, and one of them we were assigned with a carrier which was called a 100-killer group. It was a small group that went ahead of the convoy.
And in next week's episode, we're going to pick up here and talk about what it meant to be a part of a hunter-killer group. I want to take this moment to thank our listeners, and this is Marley and the Ping Jockey signing off.
Goodbye.